You're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. It's Opera Box Score. I'm Ashley Hargrave, joined this week by Oliver Camacho, Matt Cummings, and Weston Williams' editing skills. All right, this week, music critic Anne Midgette goes inside the huddle as the co-author of the article that launched classical music's Me Too movement in 2018 and the former music critic of the Washington Post. Today's guest is uniquely qualified to comment on just about everything we care about on this podcast. Next month, Midgette is a guest speaker for the Jussi Bjorling Society's webinar, The Myth of Park and Bark. Oh, we got to sign up for that. So in addition to asking her about the Kennedy Center and what we should do with all of our Domingo recordings, we'll talk about acting for singers too. Plus, in the 2-minute drill, Tom Cruise has to wash his hair, Ben Folds is not really into North Korea vibes, and we warned you, Peter Gelb. Make sure that you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify. You're going to click follow Apple Podcasts. You're going to hit the plus sign. You can also email us your hot takes by writing to mailbag@operaboxscore.com or upload a voice memo using our You Got Something to Say tab on our website, which is, guess what, operaboxscore.com. However you contribute, you'll get an OBS beer coaster, an OBS lapel pin, and a #1 OBS fan foam finger just for sharing your own hot takes. Speaking of hot takes, Oliver Camacho, I feel like you have sports hot takes this week.
Well, I just want the audience to know, and the both of you to know, that I'm committed to making this podcast. For whatever reason, the ATP turned two season run-up tournaments to the U.S. Open into a 3-week event. So each of these tournaments got like 10 days. And that means that the final of Cincinnati just happened just before we got on this call, and I had just finished work, so I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. So people who are listening to this podcast probably assume that I know what happened, but please no spoilers. Don't go back in time and ruin this match for me, which I'm about to watch after we get off this podcast. And quickly, I learned about something called the Savannah Bananas. Is that what they're called?
I went.
Okay. So somebody invited me, but I had like Ravinia tickets, so I couldn't go. But how was it?
I will tell you in just a second. But first, I want to kick it over to our courteous time traveler, Matt Cummings. Matt, what's going on with you this week?
I mean, if there's anything I'm going to be using my time travel for, it's to make tomato season last longer, because taste longer, Freudian slip. Because I had my first like real true summer BLT today for lunch, and I don't want it to ever end. Thank God it goes until October up here.
In answer to your question, Oliver, it was quite the sports-tastic weekend for your Uncle Ashley. On Friday, we did a doubleheader. I went on a work outing to the Cubs game where they played the Pirates, and then immediately that evening forgot that I had bought a ticket to the Savannah Bananas game down at Wright Field. So I went to both of Chicago's baseball stadiums in one day. How was it? It was so fun. Listeners, if you're not familiar with the Savannah Bananas, they are basically like the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball, but with more dancing somehow. It's really just an incredible, hilarious spectacle. At one point, they announce, ladies and gentlemen, the world's tallest pitcher, and the pitcher comes out on actual stilts and gets onto the mound and like pitches from the mound on stilts. It's absolutely bananas.
This sounds like a bit from Airplane.
It's like the good kind of stupid funny. You know how there's dumb bits?
Yeah, like Airplane.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Don't Come Re Shirley. It's very much in that vein. And a friend of mine was like, oh, is it for kids? And I'm like, I mean, it could be, but like I saw just as many adults having the absolute time of their lives. This was the first time I got to see Savannah. This was their first time in Chicago. They sold out Wright Field for 2 nights, Friday and Saturday, and it was an absolute hoot. And then I closed out my weekend going to the Bears preseason game at Soldier Field, where we did a 38-0 shutout against the Buffalo Bills. Now, look, it's preseason, so like nobody's really playing their starters. It was hilarious because Mitch Trubisky was there trying to audition for like the second spot behind Josh Allen on the Bills. It did not go well for him. And then, of course, we've got our Tyson Bagent and our Caleb Williams on our side for quarterbacks. So a good time was had by all. I've never sung Bear Down Chicago Bears, which is what you sing after all of the scores. I've never sung it that many times in succession.
1985 and 2025? Is that every 40 years we get a team like this?
I mean, listen, I think we can have a guarded optimism because it's preseason and that's what you do as a Bears fan. But I don't think we need to get cocky about it. So as impressive as that score was, everyone knows that being a Chicago sports fan means that you're willing to be a little bit delulu, especially in the beginnings of this season. But what's not delulu is the awesome Anne Midgette. Let's talk some opera.
Huddle up. Let's go inside the huddle.
Next month, the Jussi Bjorling Society will be presenting a webinar called The Myth of Park and Bark, featuring Greg Sandow and my guest today, Anne Midgette. Welcome to Opera Box Score.
Thanks for having me.
And I feel like I've known you for so long, but this is actually the first time we're talking. Maybe listeners of a certain age remember your time at the Washington Post as the chief classical music critic. I don't even remember how many times your name came up in my other podcast I used to do called Opera Now with Michael Rice and others. But
right.
Every now and then you would write something and it would get a bee under my bonnet, or I would heartily agree with you. But, you know, I don't even remember what you said, but I just remember that you are so much a part of the conversation, and your takes on things definitely, created the conversations in the singing community, for better or for worse. And I miss having that very clear voice and brand in the conversation. And maybe we can start by talking about what you think is going on with criticism of opera in 2025.
Well, it's tough. I got my start at Opera News, which is, of course, no more. I wrote for the Wall Street Journal for years when I lived in Europe, and that remains a great outlet, actually. But many subscribers to the Wall Street Journal are not part of the conversation in the same way. It's its own very vibrant subscriber base. And all the major papers are having their own struggles with classical music criticism right now. And there's a huge identity crisis going on in the field. It's not just criticism, it's in the field of opera itself, as people are trying to figure out how to reach audiences today and what people want, and all the discussions we've been having for the last 20 years. They're not new discussions, but opera no longer fulfills the same function in society that it filled 30 years ago. And there's no way around that. And it's sort of beside the point to blame education for it. It's a social shift that we've seen. And it's not surprising that it's reflected in criticism, especially since journalism is a foundering industry itself with all the same problems that opera has, as I used to point out in some of my pieces. But and I think also that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the role of criticism. Doug McLennan, who founded artsjournal.com back around 2001, used to say that the function of a critic was to be a watering hole, especially in the age of the internet, or specifically in the age of the internet. That is, your job is not to tell people what to think, but to draw people to where you're saying it and have their own opinions. And I really loved that model of criticism, the idea that everybody comes and exchanges ideas, and that it's okay if you don't agree with me. In fact, I love it if you don't agree with me, because the arguments are really where the love of opera comes through. And I hope that podcasts like yours are now functioning as those watering holes.
Maybe without the expertise, though, and without, the ability to have an institution like Washington Post support your endeavors to be, to get a full breadth of what is happening in the world. I mean, like, I cover my little corner of what I'm able to see with, limitations. So I don't know who's singing in Europe, or who's, who did the local Metropolitan Opera round in DC. I mean, I think that's one of the things I remember, is that you were talking sometimes about very young, up and coming voices. And, I wonder how many times your opinion about somebody who you might have heard in a storefront opera company or at a competition, how many times your opinion meted out and ended up being right about certain artists.
It's funny, before I was at the Washington Post, I was at the New York Times for 7 years as a regular freelancer. So I was reviewing for them like 4 times a week. And I had to cover a lot of things that the salaried critics didn't want to cover, which is totally normal for that job. That's, great. That's a way to cut your teeth. But I remember going to hear Magic Flute at the Mannes School of Music. And it is fair to say that I was not excited to go hear Magic Flute at the Mannes School of Music. And I always say that one of the great things about being a critic is that sometimes you really don't feel like going. And then you go and the performance is great. And you remember, I'm not just a grouch and I'm not inflicting my bad mood on everybody. I am, reinvigorated by the delight of this performance. And that Manna's Magic Flute had Young Han Lee as Tamino. And in the little bitty theater, and I said, "This is crazy. He sounds like he could be singing Radames." And I thought people are going to think I'm nuts. And I came away raving about the performance. Manus loved me for years because I gave them this wonderful review. But a lot of the singers in that performance had significant careers. And Yang Hon Lee, of course, has sung Radames in major houses around the world. He may not have set the world on fire yet, but he definitely had the potential and has had a big career in major houses. And I remember writing the words that he sounded like Radames and thinking people are going to laugh at me that the Manus Tamino sounds like Radames. But I was very, very gratified to be borne out on that one.
Well, are there any things that you wrote that you wish you could take back? Maybe things that didn't hold up so well? Now that you can think back at it.
When I started out writing about opera, I had been studying singing kind of on my own. I never had a career or anything, but one of my singer friends said, "Anne, promise me you'll always be honest. The field really needs you to be honest, and it's going to be tough. But we need you to do that." And I was kind of naive, and I'm like, "Yeah, Jenny's right. I've always got to be honest." And so, for better or worse, I was super honest. It was a lot of people really hated me, especially when I was at the Times, for my honesty. But I definitely said what I thought, and I can think of a couple of times when I slightly shaded away toward more positive, like, "Oh, don't be so negative." I'm kind of a people pleaser in my normal life. And so it was very weird that I ended up being this very honest critic. And it's often very uncomfortable. But the couple of times, I can think of one time, I think it was Debbie Voigt in something. And I was kinder than I really meant. And I like Debbie Voigt. I wanted to like it, but I felt kind of awful about that for a while because, you've got to live with what you wrote. And if you're honest, at least you can live with your conscience, and it's not a terrible thing to have been nicer than I meant to be, but that has stuck with me, And I think the other things I think of taking back were, I have a couple that were non-opera because, I wrote a lot about visual arts, especially before I came to the New York Times. After the Times and the Washington Post, I was kind of a classical music critic. But at the beginning, I wrote about a lot of different things. And there were a couple of things I would come in with a lot of assurance, saying things that I later thought, gosh, I really should have learned a little more about Stalinism before making that critique.
Well, I dread that people will go back to my opinions from 2007 and 2008. I guess when podcasting was new, I didn't realize that they were forever. But before we leave the topic of criticism, I guess I would love to hear your take on what's happened at the New York Times, specifically to Zachary Wolfe.
I'm hearing it all as a spectator, which is funny. I have no inside dope on what happened there. I'm gathering that they want a shakeup and they want new blood, which is a perennial irony for those of us who have, at the Washington Post, I myself came in as the shakeup and the new blood. And I did that and I began blogging and I was a breath of fresh air. And after you've been somewhere for 10 or 12 years, you're not new blood anymore. And I realized that to many people, I was the fogey because I was the classical music critic. And you want to say, no, I'm the new blood. You've got that wrong. But I think Zach is perfectly capable of being new blood, but he was doing what he thought was wanted of him. It's very unclear what they actually want. And as I said, I have absolutely no insight. I can see that they are talking of moving him to the obit desk. I can't think that's something he's overjoyed about, but I don't have any inside knowledge at all. It was, I will say, extremely bizarre to see that job advertised because, for a number of years, I was this regular stringer at the Times, very much hoping to be taken on staff. And there were a bunch of us. There was me, there was Jeremy Eichler, who became critic of the Boston Globe and is now a professor. There was Steve Smith. There were a whole bunch of us who sort of thought we were in line for something. And, we're all still kind of out there looking at that job description going, wow. And, they didn't hire anybody at the New York Times between Anthony Tomasini in 1990, whatever the year was that they hired him, and Zach Wolf. There was no hire in the classical music field. It was all stringers. So it was a really big deal when they hired Zach. And now here we have the post just put out there for anybody to take. And it'll be really interesting. I think a lot of the younger writers are not. I know AZ Madonna in Boston, who's wonderful, will be very qualified. She has said she's not interested in going for it. And it'll be interesting to see what direction they go in. When I was coming up in the Times, especially, there was such a right and wrong way to do it. And I felt like I was kind of trained in the old school. At the same time, I was constantly made to feel, not by my colleagues, but by the public, really, that I was so different and so weird and somehow doing it wrong. And I continue to look back at my reviews, and I'm still not sure what everybody was so upset about. But I think I just looked different and kind of came at it a little differently somehow. But I moved into a very establishment role in the music criticism world. And so now we're looking for something else new. And I fear that newspapers are kind of addicted to the idea of the new fix, much as opera houses are. Again, the parallels are legion.
Yeah. I mean, anybody who has gotten a look at Zach in real life could never accuse him of looking like, the old guard.
No.
But I felt like this was... they want to pivot towards like a multimedia approach to covering the arts, and like who can bring in whatever video and some interesting concept for the app, type of thing. Like make criticism into Wordle, How can we do
But
that?
I mean, it's so bizarre because we can do that. We had this at the Post, and I took over the Post Snapchat feed a couple days, and I did opening night at the Met back in like 2010, whenever Snapchat was first coming up. Maybe it was 2011. I don't know. And blogging. And Philip Kennicott is doing these little TikTok videos now about art at the Post. We're all very capable of doing this. It's not like it's some magic elixir that only younger people have. And it's sort of short-sighted, it seems to me, not to test out the people you have in these newer media, especially because those of us who have been around for a while have already seen a couple iterations of this. I remember being called in at the Post and some upper editor earnestly telling the whole art staff that we really needed to be posting on social media more. And I didn't want to point out that I had like 22,000 followers on Twitter, which is, not that big for the real world, but they were acting like we'd never used Twitter before, and this idea that somehow this new media will be the salvation of the form is misplaced, I think. But on the other hand, that said, I know a lot of institutions, certainly a lot of arts institutions, could use a good shakeup. And so, if it's a good shakeup, then who knows? But I regret that the Times has done it in this particular way.
Well, I knew we would spend a lot of time on this topic, but I do have many other questions I need to ask you because you are uniquely qualified as somebody who is associated with DC to talk about, to get your take on what's happening at the Kennedy Center, and if you think Washington National Opera is necessarily cushioned from what's happening over there.
I mean, everybody wants to be able to read the tea leaves to figure out what's going to go on, again, across the board. I did an interview with a German radio station about the Trump takeover of the Kennedy Center. And I said, look, in terms of the bigger picture of what's going on in this country, the Kennedy Center is not our worst worry right now.
Yeah.
It seems like a luxury to be worried about the Kennedy Center. I don't think anybody saw it coming. I am sort of intrigued to watch it because you have a lot of people now running the center who don't have a lot of arts administration experience, and what they're going to make of it and how they're going to get audiences in. I think they're going to learn it's not that easy. And asking Congress for all that money for the center which is money that had been raised by David Rubenstein, Trump's predecessor as head of the Kennedy Center, was amusing and kind of a step in that direction of like, oh my goodness, where is that 37 million going to come from? But the problem is that a lot of the left-leaning classical music and opera audience feels that the right thing to do is to boycott the Kennedy Center. And that seems a little simplistic because what that's going to make the new leaders think is, oh, nobody cares about opera anymore because look at the ticket sales, they're terrible. And that will only hurt the opera. I think we have to go back to sort of a Soviet view of, the arts as this one sort of free place of subversive expression in the middle of the hierarchy of the status quo, whatever. So I hope people do buy tickets to the opera. It's the opera and the National Symphony Orchestra are still their own bodies, still largely with their own leadership and still kind of doing the things they've been trying to do. And it would be nice not to see them get canned because of audience disinterest and then replaced by something worse. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like they don't even understand what a non-for-profit model is over there. And,
exactly.
Yeah. They're like so surprised. How come there's no money here? Like,
right, exactly. No, they don't even ask. They're like, oh my God, it's scandalous how little money there is. And it's like, no, I don't think you quite understand. But I mean, the Kennedy Center is a great example, though, because, and it sounds terrible to say it, especially right now, I've always thought that's an institution that really could use a big shakeup, as I said a couple minutes ago. And I didn't want to see it have this kind of shakeup. But looking ahead a few years, I mean, who knows how long this can go on, but there will be some successor to the current leadership in some form. It will be interesting to see what the rebuilding looks like and what is it we should be aiming for. Most of our arts institutions today are built on a model from like the 1960s or earlier. And there's other models we could be working with, So I don't know if that's a glimmer of hope or not, but I do try to look past the current administration toward whatever this is going to leave us with in the year, 2030.
Well, this isn't a perfectly formed thought yet, so feel free to interrupt me. My co-hosts know how to do this well. I feel like maybe they don't know enough about opera to understand that opera has been going through this identity crisis since 2020. And maybe they think that opera is just conservative and Carmen and Bohème. And they feel like, we don't need to investigate what's going on over there. Just let them do what they're doing because they really don't know that, especially somebody like Francesca Zambello, who, is so progressive, in everything that she's done in her career.
Yep. Well, it's funny because I looked at the schedule for next season and I feel like the opera sort of cleverly worked its schedule to give them exactly what they wanted. It's a very American schedule. It has a lot of works by Black composers. It's heavy on the sort of history. And I thought, I'm not sure that gesture will even be remarked by the people whom they're hoping to get with it. But of course, they want to make sure they get everything approved too. And I don't know that the administration has stepped in yet to argue with the opera or the orchestra about what they're actually playing. What I had heard was that the orchestra at least was told, just keep going with what you're doing, you're fine.
With National Symphony.
A National Symphony, yes.
Then they had Carlos Simon as the composer in residence, and he's very outspoken and,
Yes, they do. And they did Julia Wolf's Her Story shortly after the takeover. And of course, the audience saw it as this great act of protest and everybody was cheering and yelling. And I think people booed Vance when he came. And I thought that's a little tricky too, because if your argument is that the arts are not political and that they're for everybody, then I think you really need to try to walk the walk, like let's not have the left be the side that's politicizing it, but it's such a powder keg. I think that's such nuances are perhaps lost anyway. People are just anxious for a chance to scream and yell.
Okay. We've gotten to the topic, which I think everybody wants me to ask you about. You famously were part of, I guess we can call it an expose, as you were winding your career down at the Post, to sort of out, some of the abuse, the sex abuse and harassment that's been, the fabric of classical music. And I remember even in one of your articles, you said something about like, oh, people act like they had no idea, even though it's like the best kept secret about like James Levine or about XYZ. And now there's this website that basically is taken your idea about this and even just taken its name, wehadnoidea.org.
I'm sure they didn't think of me when they did that quote, but yes, the popular thing of, oh my goodness, we didn't know. And, it's been going on for 12 years or 20 years or whatever. It's funny because the year was late 2017, and the James Levine story had just gone up and the Charles Dutoit story had just gone up. And somebody approached me and said to me, you've got to write about, sex, Me Too in the opera world. Me Too in the classical music world, really. And I said, look, I'm a music critic. Like, I don't have the chops or the skills to write this kind of investigative piece. And this person, it was just a person from the opera industry. It was not somebody I knew or anything. He made an appointment to talk to me because he felt so much that I should write this. And he said, people will talk to you. And I said, if people want to talk to me, they can come to me and I'll try to pair them up with a journalist if I think their stories have any merit. And that is literally how it started. So he spread my name and email address and said, Anne Midgette will take your stories. And people started calling me saying, is this really Anne Midgette? And would you really take our stories? And I said, yes. And the first person who actually talked to me had been raped by a prominent musician who I was never able to name, because to name them in the paper, you need two sources on the record. At that time, today, people are very sanctimonious about we don't name victims to protect them. But that was after a good 2 years of forcing victims to be named. I can say that the stories would be a lot different that came out then if we had had those rules in place in 2018. Anyway, I ended up talking to like 70 people and wrote that story and did write it myself together with Peggy McGlone, who was the local arts reporter at the Post. And it did become this big expose. But it was funny because I had no intention of writing that story, and I didn't think that I had the chops. And I also had no knowledge of how deeply sexual harassment and abuse was, as you say, part of the fabric of the field. I really didn't. I was quite naive about it. I mean, I knew about James Levine. I knew a few things, but I didn't really understand. And I think that experience really fundamentally changed my view of the field and is one of the reasons. There were a lot of reasons that I decided to step down in 2019, about a year after that story came out. But one of them is that there's a lot of things I know that I never could print. And there's a lot of people I wouldn't have wanted ever to review again. And it becomes a little tricky. You can't name names because you can only do that as a journalist if you really have the proof, and that's proper. But on the other hand, you don't want to be part of the cover up either. And it was time for me to move on anyway. But that was definitely a role. And it's funny how I've stayed involved in, I'm still in touch with some of the people I wrote about. Some of the cases that have been exposed since were cases that we had tried to write about. And it has become a part of my life in a way I never would have imagined it in 2017.
Well, more recently, we have this story from New York Magazine, the Kara Kaiser incident with the New York Philharmonic musicians, and the more information that was released by Vulture just like 2 weeks ago or something like that.
Yeah, for people who don't know, Kara Kaiser was in her probationary year as horn player of the New York Philharmonic, and she was drugged and raped by two colleagues when the orchestra was at Vail, and not believed. And it took her a while to figure out what had happened, and because she had been unconscious. And she did not get tenure and was sort of vilified for a while. And the two perpetrators remained in the orchestra. And Vulture published a piece last year detailing the whole story finally. And that led to the dismissal of the two perpetrators who have been trying to sue to get their jobs back. And what came out 2 weeks ago was the details of their suit, including a number of other victims who had come forward. which is the reason that they did not win that suit. But it's a really shocking story. And in all of this, everybody's like, well, now finally it's known. But Kara Kaiser, that horn player, still did not get her job back. She never got any kind of restitution for the destruction of her career. It took her a long time to like rebuild her mental health and her playing. I mean, those jobs are so reliant. There's, 500 horn players wanting to get each post, and a seed of doubt or self doubt or uncertainty is kind of fatal. And she's doing really well. She's gotten other positions and she's rebuilt her career, but the New York Philharmonic has never done anything to atone for this. And it's shocking. It really is.
Yeah, things feel a little bit messy at New York Phil, but what would be satisfying for you to hear from Gustavo Dudamel, like some public statement, as he's not even installed officially yet as the new music director?
I don't know. I think that they should invite her back to play or offer some sort of financial compensation. I mean, that's her career that was unfairly torn from her because two players raped her, and those two players continued earning their big salaries for the intervening 12 years, and she was left with nothing. And there's got to be something you can do that's a little more than, oh, we deeply regret, or oh, we're so sorry. And more than just offering her to come in and sub, some kind of meaningful thing, even if it's just a concerto opportunity would be a beginning, but some form of meaningful acknowledgement. We've had a lot of lip service statements, and it's usually a CYA kind of statement, and not something that really helps the people involved.
Well, bringing it back to opera before we have to change topics again, what should we do with the Operalia competition? I cover a lot of singers who have won this thing, and I'm very happy to see their careers develop, and, they have to get up there and, shake, Placid Sunday's hand. And, you hear Joyce DiDonato giving some testimonial and some video package about what it's meant to her, and like all these things that's so icky. And, I don't know how to feel about it. I don't know how we should feel about it, if we should continue to give operalia the importance in this industry that we do.
It's a really challenging thing. I mean, I have wrestled with it a lot because I kind of grew up with Placido Domingo and I loved him as a singer. And I also think that there's no question that in the first, 40 or 50 years of his life, his sexual promiscuity was almost entirely consensual. He had lots of sex with lots of women, and I think most of them wanted to. I think, as somebody said to me once, it gets a little hairy when the person involved, the man is 70 and the woman is 20, and there's more coercion. I mean, and young artists have been told for a long time to run away when they see Domingo coming. And I used to say, I don't necessarily want to cancel everybody. I just want people to get what they deserve, to have people know who they are. With Domingo, it's tricky for me because I just find I can't listen to him anymore with any pleasure. Like even the old recordings I used to love no longer have that flair for me, even when I would like to listen to them unbiased. But as for operalia, you say the importance we give it in the industry. And my impression of operalia was always that it was a bit of a circus, a bit of a publicity thing. Yes, it has given people a lot of boosts, and that's great, and there's all kinds of shady outfits that have given people boosts. And yeah, I don't think any self-respecting institution should give it a lot of time, but I don't think we should, I don't know, smack on the wrist all of the young singers who have been boosted by it. But that's a really complicated issue because even as I say that, I think of all the possibilities of coercion and all the young women, especially young women, because that's who Placido likes. Certainly in some young artist programs, it has been the young men who have been targeted. And I always say, by the way, this is important, that the true Me Too story about the gay world, the male homosexual world in opera has yet to be written. We haven't even had the full story of James Levine. We've had a couple of stories about things that Levine did before he was at the Met or kind of on the side of the Met. But the big story that everybody thinks they know about Levine has never actually made it into the papers. And there's a lot of other gay stories, and that takes a point of view and a level of trust that nobody has been able to bring yet. Not just an aside, but I think it's an important aside, especially with Levine, because everybody now thinks that all the rumors they heard have been proven. And it's still this big web of supposition. But that's kind of relevant to what you're saying about operalia. It goes so deep in the industry. Um, in the end, I think like we have to choose for ourselves how we view the operas of the past, like how we view the singers of the past, if we still want to listen to them. But moving forward, I think it's possible to, attempt to have some sort of policy of cleaning things up, um, which doesn't really answer your question about operalia, because what the heck do you do with it?
Yeah. I want so badly to have this conversation about the gay male, what is it? Mafia of the opera
It's not
world.
even the mafia. It's I mean, there's that too, but I think the nature of gay male abuse, it's very tricky, because there was a generation of gay men when they weren't allowed to be gay. The people who have been dying out now, but the Leonard Bernstein generation, when you would spot somebody across a crowded room at a party and your eyes would lock and you would go out into the alley and have kind of quick anonymous sex in this very furtive world where you were maybe both married to women and trying to conceal it. And then now you have a generation of men who want to be married to their male partners and have kids and are totally grossed out by this icky old man making gross eye contact and trying to feel you up. And but at the same time feeling a kind of protective affection and understanding that you're coming out of this place where the mores were very different. And I think that's kind of baked into some of the abuses in the homosexual opera world over the last 30 years. And I think to really write that story, you'd want somebody with a lot of sensitivity to what it was like to be gay in the 60s and 70s and gay liberation and how that translates into abuse. I mean, one of the things I do believe is that abusers often don't understand they're abusing. They think they're just so devilishly handsome and wonderful, or the person is lucky, or they feel that they have so little power. A lot of people feel very impotent and are abusers because they're trying to feel more powerful, and they don't really understand that they're having a devastating effect on these young things whom they see as sort of golden and unassailable. Um, People seldom think in their own mind, God, I'm a really shitty abuser. You know what I mean? There's a lot of justification running around.
Well, we have to wrap up our conversation, and I want the audience to know that there's still a lot of content that you're creating, and your website also links to a lot of some of your writing, not just about music, but about other things. Well, I mean, the Leon Fleischer book, the pianist who lost use of his left hand and then restored it, and that whole incredible story. And then the famous book about Luciano Pavarotti's manager, The King and I.
Yep.
All great fodder for people who missed the golden age.
I would say that Pavarotti book, it's Pavarotti as seen through the eyes of his manager. And I think it's a lot of fun, actually. Like, of the books I've written, that if you're an opera lover, it's got a lot of dish in it. It's got a lot of dish in it and a lot of gossip, but I think it's a fun read. I mean, if I do say so myself, it's not that it's so great, but.
Well, speaking of the golden age, you're going to be part of a webinar on the 18th, hosted by the Jussi Bjorling Society. And, it strikes me that, today with opera and HD broadcasts and just the oversaturation in the market of singers and all the skills that we're now expected to have in order to even have a chance in this career, that there is this misconception that singers from earlier generations didn't care about the drama and maybe didn't move as much and contribute to the visual art form of opera. And I suspect that your webinar is going to refute those ideas.
Absolutely. I think it's such a misconception. I mean, look at Maria Callas, who always wanted to take something away before going on stage, stripping it down, that there's a lot more power in being still on stage than there is in being frantic. And I feel like stage direction in general and opera direction in particular has gotten more and more frantic in the under the guise of being naturalistic, and it's not naturalistic at all. I remember seeing Angela Georgiou doing a Traviata maybe 15 years ago now, and the friend I was with leaned over at one point and said, "Is she going to swing from the chandeliers in a minute?" She was really going for it. And Netrebko would do that too. And everybody was hailing Netrebko as this great actress. And obviously Netrebko's been through a lot of phases. But when she was coming up, she had a lot of talent, but it was very busy. And you look at old videos of Corelli, there were so many people, and we're doing this talk for the Jussi Bjorling Society, and of course, he's a fine example too. But Carlo Bergonzi is someone else who acts with his voice to break your heart. The fact that he's kind of a tubby little man doesn't mean that he can't have powerful dramatic effect. And I was amused. I was watching an old season of RuPaul's Drag Race the other week, and somebody mentioned that they wanted to do park and bark, which to him meant standing up there and pouring out your heart. And I thought, this is fascinating that this term, which is pejorative in the opera world, has been possibly correctly adopted by at least some part of the drag world into being this wonderful thing that you can do. And so, yes, we're going to show a few examples of how good acting was in the golden age, and how we are mistaken in any belief that we're better in that regard across the board today.
It's interesting because I coach sometimes people in their movement, and the basis of my techniques are all in Baroque opera. And how, where you put your weight on your feet, and, how you keep your body in contrapposto, and, what it means to be powerful, what it means to be supplicant, it's all done with postures. But it's almost like, you have to think about the art of the time and how hierarchy is established through posture and through placement on the stage. And I feel like if you can create that type of visual interest, you don't actually have to do that much once you have created a beautiful tableau for the audience. And you look at something like Maria Callas singing that Paris concert, and she sings Al non credea, and she has this beautiful, home posture that she comes back to, and you'll get some gestures, but it's all about creating that beautiful, tableau for the audience so we understand the character.
Absolutely. And then it lets you get into the music more. Whereas if you're flailing around on stage too much, then it takes you out of the music. And I think people have this problem today. They feel the music needs to be driven home to an audience that may not understand it otherwise. And it's rather the opposite. People are very musically literate today. They may not be operatically literate, but they are musically literate. And so you've got to give them a chance to appreciate the art form rather than try to hit them over the head with it.
Well, if we had time, I'd be curious to hear who you think these days have a special skill in being musical and presenting physically the music as well. I mean, I keep hearing about Ermonela Yajo, and I only, can listen to her. I haven't seen her live because she doesn't really come to the U.S., or she doesn't come to Chicago at least, But people seem to go crazy for her performances.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't go to things the way I used to go to things. And so I don't get to hear as much or to follow as much. But I have been jolted out of my curmudgeonly posture of, these kids today aren't what they used to be, by a number of really talented young singers, although not having prepared. I have to go back to my mental data to find some. But I would say the tenor Kang Wang, who's an Australian Chinese tenor, is a great example of somebody who really has a kind of old school flair and excitement and heroism to his singing. I did a talk for the Bjorling Society a couple of years ago about heroic singing and how our definition of heroic singing had evolved or degenerated into meaning very loud, like the Domingo take on heroic singing is big, and his voice isn't that big, but that's how he approached it. But you go back to Leo Slezak, and Leo Slezak had this incredible falsetto, this sort of melting sound that he could do. And, we think of Leo Slezak today as being this big, beefy Wagnerian, and we wouldn't think of a singer like that having that in his arsenal. But that was part of the technique of singing, and it didn't at all question somebody's masculinity or heroism to have this incredibly melting sweetness in the voice. And that sweetness has gone out of dramatic male voices to a large degree. It was interesting in doing that talk that Roberto Alagna was the one who had the most vestiges of that kind of approach when I really started listening. And I thought that makes sense. Alagna comes out of a sort of Gallic Italian school of training where there was still a little premium on sweetness. But of course, Bjorling is the place where the sweetness and the heroic meet. He does have the ringing tone, and he's starting to get bigger in his singing, but there's still that incredibly melting sweetness. He's sitting right at the divide, if you will, between these two approaches.
The Myth of Park and Bark is presented by the Jussi Bjorling Society on Thursday, September 18th. You can find more information at operaboxscore.com. Anne Midgette, we obviously could have spent the entire hour talking, but we have to wrap up this show right now. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thanks so much for having me. What a pleasure.
My thanks to the PR team for the Jussi Bjorling Society, who coordinated the interview with Anne Midgette. I don't know. I know I'm much older than the both of you. I think if I put both of your ages together, I'm still older than you guys. But I don't know if you remember when Anne Midgette used to write a lot about the opera world, or if you perhaps
It wasn't that long ago, Oliver. You're making it sound like she was like writing dispatches over telegraph.
It was a hammer and chisel. We were gathering for the winter.
I mean, I would have been terrified to ever be reviewed by her.
Exactly.
Heavens no.
That's what I almost said to her. I mean, I started out saying that she got under my skin a lot because she said some things about singers, but at least I read her, and because she had such strong opinions, it made her reading like compulsory, I think. Made reading her writing compulsory for us in the industry. And she had, she has her taste, and I think she has a very good ear. If you want to read some of her writing, you can go to annemidgette.com, where there are some selected articles and links to her books and etc. So great guest. If she was available every week, she could be our third panelist.
Well, as long as you have one lady on the panel, that's fine. So if I ever need to sub out so that Anne Midgette can be put into the panel, and I will absolutely abdicate my position so that you can be of even more service. Hey, if you are enjoying what you're hearing today, why don't you help us spread the word about Opera Box Score? You can give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. And if you have a few extra moments, why not write a really nice review that talks about how pretty all of us are? Because it's a podcast and pretty is important. You know what else is important? The 2-minute drill coming up next.
This just in. The 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
Anna Netrebko's lawyer has submitted a revised complaint in her lawsuit alleging that the Met and Peter Gelb acted maliciously by defaming and disparaging her in retaliation for asserting her rights. The complaint also alleges that they inflicted harm on her career by publicly dissuading other companies from employing her. A letter filed alongside the complaint calls the claim of Netrebko having, quote, certain conversations with the Kremlin, a brand new assertion that Gelb allegedly recently fabricated. The letter also notes that several cease and desist letters have been sent.
Tom Cruise has declined a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Kennedy Center, citing scheduling conflicts, according to the Washington Post. Ooh, that's gotta hurt. President Trump had hoped to add Cruise to this year's list of Kennedy Center honorees, which includes country singer George Strait, rock band Kiss, Michael Crawford, the original Phantom of the Opera, disco star Gloria Gaynor, and athlete, thespian, Academy Award winner, Sylvester Stallone. Trump also announced he will host the televised event himself to boost ratings.
In additional WTF at KC news, Ben Folds went on the record with The Hollywood Reporter to discuss why he left his position as Kennedy Center's artistic advisor. He said it was lending my name to help stand for, some kind of North Korean vibe. It wasn't the politics so much as it's a partisan takeover, which is a very authoritarian thing to do.
Naxos Music Group has denied entering into a partnership with Chinese classical music company Quk Music after the latter announced a collaboration involving, quote, a tool designed to modularize music copyrights through AI and blockchain technology. which, as a side note, sounds like it was written with AI itself. Cuke has since retracted its press release announcing the partnership. The denial comes as Naxos is suing Cuke Music for over $1.8 million in missed payments.
In an article for classicalmusic.uk, author Anne Templer interviews musicians about their alcohol use, exploring how the pressure for perfection and career networking put professional artists at increased risk for addiction. One interviewee described abandoning her dream of becoming an orchestral trumpeter to switch to opera because of the social drinking pressure among brass players.
In trade news, Opera Colorado is expanding its leadership team, with Dennis Robinson Jr. joining as Director of Programs and Partnerships and Sarah Leitch added as Director of Development.
Exit stage right, lyric soprano and educator Marlene Rosen has died at age 82 following a short illness. After earning degrees from Temple University and the University of Illinois, Rosen was a Midwest regional winner of the Metropolitan Opera auditions and went on to a regional career in opera and concert before beginning a notable teaching career at Oberlin College. For me, teaching is more than making someone a better singer, Rosen said when receiving Oberlin's Excellence in Teaching Award in 2013. It's also about addressing the entire individual and finding opportunities to teach life lessons.
And on this day, August 18th, in 1820, it was the first performance of Franz Schubert's opera Die Zauberharfe. Only the overture is performed these days under the name Rosamunde. In 1912, it was Franz Schrecker's Der ferne Klang that premiered at the Opernhaus in Frankfurt in 1912. That's for you, Weston. In 1745, German-based Ludwig Fischer was born in Mainz. He created the role of Osmin in Mozart's Abduction from the Seraglio. And speaking of Mozart, the guy who killed him was born in 1750, Italian composer Antonio Salieri. In 1849, French composer Benjamin Godard was born in Paris. In 1864, Italian soprano Gemma Bellincioni, who created the role of Santuzza, was born at Como, Monza. In 1873, Austrian tenor Leo Slezak was born in Moravia. 1897 saw the birth of German-based Adolf Vogel, whose pupils include Norman Bailey, that makes sense, and Eno Johanni Rautuvara, makes no sense. In 1933, Belgian-based Jules Bastin was born. In 1940, American mezzo-soprano Joy Davidson was born in Fort Collins, Colorado. In 1946, American tenor Barry Lee Buse was born in Gloversville, New York. He created the role of Louis Sullivan in Shining Brow, an opera by Hagen, and the title character of Nosferatu by Peters. He was born in 1946. And happy birthday to composer Tan Dun, born this day in Hunan, China, 1957.
And that's your 2-minute drill.
A little bit of Leo Slezak singing the tomb scene from Aida that was recorded on wax cylinders in 1909. It wasn't an actual tomb he was singing from, but those cylinder recordings sometimes sound like that. I thought it was a nice coincidence that Anne Midgette brought up Leo Slezak in our interview, and it happens to be his birthday. You see, it's the harmony of the universe.
It all works together, even though it's not working so much on the news this week. A little bit of a slow news week, excuse me. Although that's kind of what happens in mid-August. I feel like this is sort of the calm before the ramp up of season openings and the back to schools and whatnot. And this is all I'm going to say on our opening tip. Peter, we told you. We told you. Moving on. In looking at this article that Anne Templer wrote for classicalmusic.uk, it was hilarious to me, not because addiction's hilarious, because it's not, but the juxtaposition of hearing about all of these people that felt this pressure to drink in the world of orchestral music, which is honestly kind of true. Some of the people that have partied the hardest with have absolutely been the brass players when I was a horn player.
Definitely.
But also, first of all, opera singers can tie one on. But I was reading and hearing about this immediately as I was hearing about how Gallup is announcing that U.S. drinking rates are at a new low as alcohol concerns surge. So basically, the percentage of U.S. adults who say they consume alcohol has dropped to 54%. That is the lowest in Gallup's 90-year trend of paying attention to this. So, for up through 2023, at least 60% of Americans reported, that they drank alcohol. So it was very interesting to hear about these things in juxtaposition together. And I think it's kind of a generational thing. I don't know how much interaction you have with the youths, but their interest in consuming alcoholic beverages seems to be greatly decreased from the generations before them. Did you guys have a similar thought in the article?
Well, I'll add before I talk about my own experiences that our friend Catherine Needleman, our future friend of the show, I assume, just shared the principal trumpet player, principal bassoonist or something of some orchestra, I think in Australia, shared the job posting on his personal social media. And he describes his section as being, always ready for a beer. And there's pictures of him at the beach. And it's like a very bro profile. And that's why Catherine Needleman wanted to share it, because great. So you are the leader of this section and you are basically telling women that you're not going to have a good time if you're going to play with us, discouraging them from auditioning. Not maybe explicitly doing that, but that's sort of the message that's received, whether he realizes it or not. As far as my friends who are orchestral musicians, I guess I know too many oboe players, and they are very high strung, and I think they're too maybe paranoid about their dexterity, their manual dexterity, since they're dealing with knives all the time, to really be heavy drinkers. And then all my string player friends are Asian. I know that's super stereotypical, and I don't usually associate heavy drinking with Asians. So that's my response to the story. Maybe it's a UK thing.
I don't think it's a UK thing necessarily. I mean, I do think that
American.
I think it's definitely true over here as well. A lot of it does come out of this perfectionism and pressure that many musicians have, that is only reinforced by the culture, even more so in orchestral music than in singing, when we are allowed to get away with mistakes that an oboist would never be permitted to do so. But the lifestyle itself is just such a welcoming environment to that kind of social drinking turning into more habitual drinking, given there are a lot of late nights. It's often the only thing that you can really do to socialize with other people if you're traveling for a gig, or it becomes a crutch for people to wind down after a late rehearsal or a performance. So, and those things can build up over time. I definitely don't think that singers are exempt from this pressure, even if it is stronger among brass players in particular and orchestral musicians.
I appreciate what Anne is doing in speaking about this. And it really just comes down to, what are the things that people are doing to sort of manage the high demands and the very intense lifestyle that is maintaining this art. And it just so happens that there's this common thread of some people turning to this one thing to sort of help take their edge off. But I do understand that, and it makes a lot of sense to me, but it also still made me kind of chuckle that immediately after I read that story, a news article popped up on my phone that was nobody in America drinks anymore. Bars are suffering.
And that trumpeter who's like, I guess I'll do opera instead.
Yeah, I was like, honey, opera's what drove me to drink. I don't understand.
I don't know that you're really going to find a respite there, but sure.
Speaking of things that drive me to drink, we're going to need to talk about the Kennedy Center, and we're going to need to do it right now. First of all, I hope you're both applauding me for my Ben Folds impression. Second of all, gentlemen, sit down. I'm going to need to rant for a second. Okay, we have to talk about this. So first of all, this thing about Tom Cruise saying that he is declining because of scheduling conflicts. Tom Cruise is the poster child for a very we'll call it interesting faith circle. If he is trying to find ways to back out of a Kennedy Center honoree position. Wow. Okay, so that's point one.
Especially
Point
with
two.
scheduling conflicts, the most transparent excuse one could possibly give. He's catching up on his correspondence.
He's looking for Shelley Miscavige. What? Scientology joke? There it is. But this is the other point I want to make, is that our president, some call him dear leader, was very clear when he took over the Kennedy Center, which is exactly what he did. He was complaining about the progressiveness and the wokeness and too many drag queens, too many gays, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the gays were inferred, but you know. How gay is this list of Kennedy Center honorees? Let's unpack these, shall we? Okay. George Strait, first of all, anybody that comes from a certain generation, mine, male, female, everything in between, you're a little bit gay for George Strait. Like, you just are. You're a little bit gay for George. Michael Crawford, Phantom of the Opera's Michael Crawford, Gloria Gaynor. And my favorite one is Kiss. You know, that legendary rock band that wears tight spandex costumes and has garish makeup and gigantic wigs? That's drag, baby. Every bit of that's drag. They've said as much. They've said that they've modeled their performances on drag. So I'd like to congratulate the president on removing all of those drag queens from the Kennedy Center like he said he was going to. Okay, I need a minute. Feel free to chime in.
I just want to comment on Ben Folds. I'm not really a Ben Folds music person. It's fine for me. But I missed that show, The Sing Off. I don't know if you guys ever watched The Sing Off.
Yes, I loved that show.
That was such a good show. What happened? How come we can't have nice things? Because like the Pentatonics, for what it's worth, came out of that show. That's how that's their claim to fame, as having won that. But it was great to have a music competition where somebody was smart enough to actually talk about musical things to the contestants and for the audience, which is maybe why it got canceled, because maybe the NBC executives like, I don't follow what does that mean?
They were like Jennifer Lopez when Harry Connick Jr. tried to explain riffing to her in the American Idol auditions.
You know, it's hilarious that you mentioned The Sing Off. The Sing Off also had another one of my favorite artists on its judging panel, and that is Sean Stockman, who is one of the members of Boyz II Men. Those two were excellent. Listeners, if you've never listened to clips from The Sing Off, I encourage you to go and give that stuff a goog. There's a really amazing cover of Hozier's Take Me to Church. And like to this day, I will watch that, and it is incredibly, incredibly moving.
Michael Crawford, if you can find an excuse to not go to the Kennedy Center too, that would be great. Just saying.
Yeah,
Putting that out there.
This is my question. Like, these have been announced. So does that mean that it's like a done deal and they have accepted? And if so, at 2, Gloria, at 2, come on.
You will not survive this.
Oh my God, I hate you. Let's wrap the show up.
Good call. Bad call on Opera Box Score.
Good call, bad call, how we always end our shows. I will first go to Oliver Camacho.
I want to turn your attention to a weekend edition show, Wicked Edition story from NPR. This past Sunday, they shared audio from a unique summer language course in Vermont, Vermont's famed Middlebury Language School, where opera singers perfect their German. It's just a 3-minute story, but I was really delighted to, in the middle of my morning, to hear, talking about, German vowels and double consonants, stuff like that. Completely random, very small audience that this story was created for, and I was one of them, so I felt seen. And also a shout out, a good call to the career of soprano Andrea Haynes. The soprano won Voces 8 for the past 17 years. This week, she gave her last American concert as she wraps up her tenure with Voces 8. We love you, Andrea. I hope the future is bright.
Matt Cummings.
So first off, starting off with yet another bad call to me for maligning the best TV show not on the air anymore, The Gilded Age, as a show where nothing happens and all the drama is preposterous, because little did I know when I turned on the finale that I was going to see one of the most incredibly nuanced and rich subtext confrontations between Felicia Rashad and Audra McDonald that I wouldn't be surprised if Audra ends up taking home an Emmy Emmy for this season after Nicole Scherzinger kind of stole that Tony from her. But I digress. The good call goes to this New York Times bio of Cecilia Bartoli at the Salzburg Festival, which we are going to share in our show notes, and that I absolutely must read a quote from. Bartoli, who was born and raised in Rome and who values excellent food, compared her artistry to ragu. What's the secret of a good ragu, she said? It's time. You cannot make a good ragu sauce in 5 minutes. She then made the bloop bloop sound of a simmering sauce and said that slowness is just as necessary in music. I can picture it now. It reminds me of that ad that she made for the St. Petersburg album, where she's like, you know it's me. I don't like to fly, so I'm swimming. I've got to go. It's far away.
Oh my God.
If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up on YouTube. You will not be disappointed.
International treasure, Cecilia Bartoli. My 2 good calls this week are shockingly not opera related, although music related. Hayley Williams, who is the singer for Paramore, a couple of weeks ago sort of dropped an album, only it's not a full album. So when you look them up on Spotify, they're not necessarily tied together as an album, but they are tracks that all kind of have the same similar color scheme and cover art. So if you check out Hayley Williams on Spotify, there's a couple of really great songs with biting lyrics. And she is an artist that, like, I don't always think of, but when I do think of her, I'm so glad that I did. So definitely check out those new tracks by Hayley Williams. And finally, I got a massage from a robot, and I need to talk about it. So there's this company called Escape, spelled AESCAPE. And I don't get into this too much on this show, listeners, but I am a little bit of a spa treatment whore. I will try anything once. And so when someone told me there were robots that gave massages, I absolutely went and signed up for it. It was excellent. It was wonderful. It's never going to replace a human. This is not the robots are taking our jobs sort of a thing, but it was definitely something that was way more intuitive and excellent than I thought it was, and also relatively affordable. So if you are one of those people that's not comfortable with massage because you're not comfortable with other people touching you, try robot massage. It was absolutely fantastic, and I would do it again. In fact, I have one booked for next week. That is it for this week's edition of America's Talk Radio show about opera. Make sure that you subscribe to this show wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get your voice heard and find links to the stuff that we've talked about on our website, which is, guess what? operaboxscore.com. That is also where you can put your money where our mouths are. You can give back to OBS using the Support the Team tab. Your announcer is Norm Waddell, your creative consultant is Oliver Camacho, and your audio editor is Weston Williams. The executive producer of OBS is George Cedarquist. For co-host Matt Cummings and our guest Anne Midgette, I'm Ashley Hardgrave, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you evade being honored due to scheduling conflicts. We're back with an all-new show next week when friend of the show, Carrie Ann Otanyo, goes back inside the huddle to report on everything happening at Opera Delaware. Plus, you'll get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more bloop bloop sounds. Join us.